tell where it's already going. I'm already on evening mode and I'm trying to get through Friday, so let's just welcome everybody. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the August 2017 special meeting of the Atherton Town Council. Can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Lewis?
Here.
Councilmember Lefferts?
Here.
Councilmember DeGolia? Vice Mayor Whitmer? Mayor Weiss?
Here. Public comments, closed session, I guess, Bill?
Already made the announcement.
Already made the announcement, thank you very much. Public comments on any item on the agenda, please step up.
Is it only me?
Well, it's you if you want.
Good morning. I had to figure out what time it was. Good morning. My name is Christine David, and I'm a resident of Atherton. And I actually was planning to come to this meeting, but I was actually asked also to comment for others that are at work today, this morning. And the major feeling from the residents is that though they respect the fact that we have to cost cut on many parts of the town center as it was planned, they're hoping that the cost savings doesn't change the character of the project as it was promised and presented to the residents. You know, everybody understands that, you know, the economy is rising, the cost of building these buildings is tremendous. It's reprehensible that it's 53 to 56 million. It's like unbelievable, but it's real. People understand that. They understand also that we really did, you know, I had the benefit of being on the CCAC kind of midway through the process. And I was very impressed with how careful everyone was, even at that point, with cost savings. Space savings, I don't think there was an extra inch added. Most of it was taken away before we even presented the project to the residents. And I thought I was going to be the one being the voice of reason, you know, saying, don't put Italian marble in the toilets, we don't need it. I never heard anything like that. It was more so, what's the least expensive thing we can use that still has the integrity of the look and feel? You know, how can we make it beautiful and Atherton-like, but be cost sensitive? Sorry, I didn't really prepare for this, but anyway, so the feeling of the residents is a bit of frustration. They'd like to see the project started. They'd like to see it started as presented. People have come up to me and said, gee, you know, we were asked if we wanted to have the town borrow, and we said yes. Do we want the town to build the town center? We said yes. We looked at the plans. They're beautiful. Let's do it. The price came in high. God, it came in high. But it's probably going to get higher, and the value of our dollar is going to go down. So we kind of have to bite the bullet, and there's never a good time to have a baby, right? Well, you guys haven't had them, but we have. There's never a good time to push, right? And I understand that you're under a tremendous amount of pressure from every side. And I know we have wonderful donors who are also in the business of building buildings, and they have been very helpful with their cost savings recommendations. But what I'm particularly disturbed about is thinking of changing the character of the project, because we were so careful in building it in the first place. I mean, granted, other residents weren't in that process, but I was blown away at how careful we were. So my message to you from others is, please don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I heard, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. And Amy Hannigan told me I have to say this. She's our resident on Atherton, and she's a doctor, so she's at work. She said, do not change the plans. Quote, I feel like I was sold a bill of goods. The pictures that were proposed, we approved. Those are what we expect. And another neighbor said, the town council is looking too closely at the details and forgetting the big picture. The big picture is what we want. So that's my message. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Any other?
I am Walter Sleeth, and I live in Lindenwood, and I'm also on the Friends of the Library Committee. And I'm here because I read Barbara Wood's article yesterday in the Almanac. And the main reason I'm here is, on behalf of the library, I really want you to be fair to the library, to move ahead with that, even if you can't go ahead with the whole project now. It's time to get the library started. Also, I want to carefully see how much money you've taken away from the library funds in order to help the Civic Center or the landscaping. I think should be a fair allotment, but no more than a fair allotment for this. That just would be absurd. So anyways, those are my points, and I, on behalf of the Friends of the Library, am going to try to hold your feet to the fire on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ollie. Any other members of the public who would like to make a comment on an item that is on the agenda? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close public comments, and I'm going to move forward to item number one. And I think item number one can be broken down just for public sake, and I think staff's sake, and our sake as well, into 5 different categories, which is basically outlined in the description. And I think we'll, at each point, be able to ask members of the public if you have comment on each one of the items as they're broken down. And I will open public comment and then bring it back to us so that you don't have to worry about making a public comment on the whole project. You'll be able to make a comment during a portion of that section. So if I can ask staff, go ahead and.
You define what the 5.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So if we look at the actual description, provide direction on the design, changes and value engineering options for the library would be item number 1. Item number 2, direct staff to request a redesign proposal from WRNS as item number 2. Item number 3, receive and update and the process of the value engineering for the administration and PD. That would be item number 3. Item number 4, receive, discuss, and provide direction related to the funding and overall project. That would be item number 4. Item number 5, provide direction on potential demo of the library building.
Can I suggest,
Please.
can I suggest maybe move 5 to 3 so the library items are all in a list?
Yeah, okay.
Does that work for you? Is that
It does,
on
it
your
does,
thought?
yes.
Is that?
And the reason that we have this giant subject matter is because of a legal tweak.
Yeah, sort of a
Transparency thing.
transparency issue around that, making sure that we cover everything
That
in
we're
the
gonna talk
title
about.
of the item, as well as a project description that is on the agenda for public transparency.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm very sorry. Please, just, it might be helpful to actually understand better the funding we have as we go into the discussion. I thought last meeting Rick came up and he raised some issues relating to the amount of monies that are available that were really relevant to the rest of the conversation. I don't know if there's anything like that that we need to talk about first, but if there is, it might be helpful.
I have to
Specifically to
agree.
the library, right? Yeah.
I agree with that. You know, Rick and I have had the conversation on where I think the board is going, and I heard from Anne Marie. And I think that where the funding is and how the funding would be available is pertinent to making a decision on some of these recommendations or redesigning things. So I would suggest that we maybe have a good conversation on the funding first.
Okay.
Are we separating the civic center from the library? This is specific to the library?
Okay, so what we're going to do is, since there's been some tremendously good input at this point, we are going to now add a layer of the onion into item number 1, which is okay because it's on the agenda, related to the library funding component, just for the library itself. We're going to leave item number 4 where it is because that's a broader view of, and would also can include further discussion related to the library funding component. But we will add a layer again into item number 1, which will be directly related to donor funds. That makes sense. So that is a broader, but focusing more on the library. Obviously, donor funds related to the library. Project funds will be a wider swipe and brush than the other item number 4. Does that make sense? Because item number 4 is going to be a little bit of a higher view, not necessarily a drill down on the donor fund component of the facility. But we'll talk about the funding component to the library, which will be the donor funds. So that's open category for item number 1. Make sense?
Do you want to start with that one?
So we'll start with item number 1. We will change 3 to 5 for information in the public. So 5 will now be 3 and 3 will now be 5. Okay? And 4 will stay where it is. Okay? George?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's actually going to be the Marty and John show, as well as Paul and Marty.
Yeah, good morning, Mayor, members of council. Today, as we're going to start off, we'll just focus on number 1, item number 1, to review and discuss, provide direction on design changes and value engineering options for the library. And John Schluter from WRNS is here, and we're going to be speaking towards attachment number 5, which is currently on your screen, and hopefully.
Marty, I'm sorry, could you just,
Please.
I thought what the process we just discussed was, let's talk first about the funding. So the problem is we know what we're aiming at when we start looking at design things. So it's sort of nice to know broadly, dollar-wise, what we're looking at.
So,
Sure, I'm happy to. So
Please.
specifically related to the library, the council's original target was to keep the estimated construction cost of the library based on the MAC 5 estimate at $16.5 million. That's where the original construction estimate was for site work and facility. So when the PMC started to look at value engineering, that was their target, was 16.5. Since then, it's been further discussed by the council that there's actually more library revenue out there than at 16.5. And on the revenue side of the equation, it was more like 18.2. And that's what the council's been hearing for a number of years now, on what the estimated library revenue is over the course of the construction of the project. That took us through fiscal year 21-22. However, during the last council meeting, the mayor actually spoke to Carol Broom, a member of the board who was in the audience, and then Marie Spain as well, and noted that they were interested in fronting some of the additional surplus funds that might be available to the town in those future years in order to fund the library that they wanted, the features of the library that they wanted. So before you start cutting square footage and before you start taking draconian measures to cut in the library, think about how much additional revenue you could receive from the library through those donor funds. And they, at the time, said during the public meeting, yes, we'd be open to a conversation around 100% of the available donor funds, which is about surplus funds, which is about 1.45 million each year in future years until the library is complete in terms of the library that we want. So in reality, if you had 2 additional years of funding, your available funding for the library is now 21.2 million instead of 18.2. You can add a third year on top of that of another 1.45, and then your available funding is 22.7. So when you're looking at library costs, including a contingency of a certain dollar figure, you have about $22.7 million in available funding if the library JPA board is willing to contribute up to 3 additional years of surplus funds. 100% of those surplus funds. That adds any clarity to it, Rick?
Well, let me just add that, yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that the 16.5 number is no longer relevant. We should look at 18.2 and part of the reason for that is, given the delay in construction, we've gone into another fiscal year. So, the amendment to the JPA at the library always contemplated that we would have a use of 100% of the excess tax dollars, which had been called donor funds, until the library opened, which would now be 18.2. And the additional 3 years would get us exactly to where George said. We would get an advance on those 3 years. That has to be authorized by the governing board. I understand that's coming to the governing board on September 17th meeting. That would give us an aggregate of 22.7 to work with. And the county, the way it would work is the county has proposed that on the Bay Canal, that they advance us funds and then we would pay those funds back over time. And that was what I think we would propose if we go forward with a 22.7 or close. That includes the contingency, a library that would cost that much, then we would request an advance for those funds, which the county would advance to us, and then they would just take the excess tax dollars every year. They wouldn't come into our trust fund, and they would take those tax dollars until that advance was fully paid off.
It's not like we would be paying them, they would just not.
They would just, they would just not, they would retain, because all those tax dollars go to the county. that gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of what we would design, and I think the PMC in assessing it has still done the value engineering, and there are recommended cuts, which we're gonna talk about today. But it gives us more flexibility to include in this library the best thing we can and what staff wants. And staff, we met with staff in a joint meeting, the PMC and the library staff, and they were very clear about what they wanted and why, and that's the basis for the recommendations from the PMC.
Through the mayor.
Please.
Could I just add on just a couple of things? What Rick has said is, I think, very, very clear, and in the library, the PNC meeting with the library, JPA, executives, Anne Marie and other staff, there are recommended changes that should be made, but then other things that, you know, on the surface, we thought, oh, that's excessive, that's not, but they want to retain because of the look and feel that they want. I want to make a point that we are in a very, as Christine aptly said, the bids came in over 30%, 40%. The market has increased in the last 6 months over 30% of cost estimates. If we went in at a cost of 16.5 million, 30% would add how much? Another 4.9 million? Then that comes up to like 21 million in costs for what we were expecting. And so now, you know, but we have that revenue from our residents' property taxes. And if the JPA board, which I feel will acknowledge because Unisite has spent all of their donor funds, Portola Valley used all their donor funds and continue to use their excess donor funds, you know, excess taxpayer funds to improve their facilities. And I think that this would be a very reasonable request. So I think we have more money before we get into saying, oh, well, we're gonna, you know, cut off the tail end and reduce the size and make it something that is not what the county wants as a library, and it really does project out over the term of the construction.
Thank you. If any member of council has questions for staff related to the donor fund component or anything that was just said, this would be a good opportunity.
I did have a question. I just want to make sure I understand the years. So it's, you said 18.2 goes through fiscal year 21-22.
Correct.
Then you add either 2 or 3 years beyond that. So help me out. Let me think.
Fiscal year 24-25 would be the last year.
Would be the 24-25. Okay. And this would be assuming the library actually physically opened in approximately what?
21-22.
It also assumes 100% use of the contingency if we, you know, so if the contingency wasn't triggered, then obviously we may not need the advance of the 24-25.
So, I have a question.
Bill, please.
Yeah, so the funding of the library's operation, once we open the new library, will be probably higher than what it is today. So these numbers, you know, the 23 might not be exactly what we realize. So have you considered that?
How
No,
tax
so-
dollars go up?
The answer is, we just used the number that the library gave us as the excess for the current year.
Okay.
And there's an expectation that there'll be some reduced costs during construction and some increased cost after construction, but since we don't have a real number, we didn't do it. So what I'm sure will come before the governing board is the concept of enabling an advance of these donor funds after the library is open, to the extent that we need them to build what
Okay.
we're designing.
So if in fact we needed some 25, 26 funding, that would, if they have we're going to fund the development of the library the way that we think we need to have it, and all those costs would be covered 100% out of our donor funds, and then thereafter we'll do that 50-50 split. Then that's, you know, a milestone-driven commitment as opposed to a dollar commitment, and I think that that's very realistic.
I mean, that's gonna come before the government board, so.
On the 17th.
Yeah, on the 17th, that'll give us time to assess it. I'm sure it'll be a reasonable discussion.
Any more questions? I got 3 talkers, but yes, please.
Would it be fair to say that over the next few years, that estimated, today's excess fund of 1.5 could potentially go up because of our overall property tax revenue?
So there's lots of variables.
Yes, okay, so that constant, right, and then.
I think it's a principle
Yes.
that will have to bring before the government board.
Perfect. Any more questions for you guys on this subject? And frankly, I think we can ask them. Seeing none, I am, just because this is a little irregular, is there any member of the public who would like to make a public comment related to donor funds? Please.
I just have a question on the spreadsheet. I'm sorry, I haven't reviewed it for this morning. I'm lazy. As of Wednesday, thanks to Robert and Marty, questions were brought up about redesign costs being included in the bottom line. And so I don't know if that's there. And also, was a contingency added to this? Because I think as we're talking about all the variables, there's all kinds of things out there that can come back to haunt us again when we go out to bid. Those are my only comments. I want to make sure we include everything.
Thank you. Any other member focused on donor funds? Thank you. I'm going to close public comment. Back to council. We don't have any. We're going to summarize, but if you would like to summarize at this point, we can. I'm comfortable with where we are related to this donor fund conversation to be able to move into staff's next level presentation. Okay, Marty, please.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, John Schloeder's here. He's going to walk us through attachment 5. Again, this is the result, the outcome of the joint meeting with the library and PMC on August 1st. And what we have in front of you is attachment 5 that John, you want to come up and speak to that?
So can I just ask, as we go through this, I've been through this several times at PMC, we know it's complicated.
Yes.
And the last time we tried to do this at the council level, we got stuck on the first issue and never got off it. So I think this will be easier because there's been a lot of prep work done. But I would suggest that if somebody has a question on a specific item, that we stop and go into it at that time, rather than wait to the end, because there's a whole lot of material.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And perhaps to focus on what the recommended list is
Yeah, I think
versus
that's right.
the whole.
I think that we should look at
And
that.
maybe just an overview of how it's broken up. Okay, the first column, you're gonna do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the bare bones and this and then that.
And then
okay?
focus on the recommended one.
And then I want to tee off from what Dee Dee said. We have to, John, we have to really understand if we go the recommended option, how much design work is really gonna be involved in doing that, because it's not in here.
Right.
Design work.
Good point.
Okay, yeah.
You look-
I have a young child, so I don't get regular sleep. That's the sign.
Did everybody get that? Did everybody get that?
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's good.
Okay, please, and remember, I know, speak.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, members of council, thank you again for the opportunity today to come and report with what we've been developing here with town staff and the PMC, this library summary. So in terms of the format, overall what we're looking at, if you have attachment 5 in front of you, the far left column represents the reconciled estimate. This is the bid documents with the reconciled pass per MAC 5, looking at the construction market again in today's sense of dollars. And this is what we use to essentially get to the numbers that we just discussed around funding and the original baseline target for our goal in terms of a budget for the project. And so if you follow that left category or left column all the way down to the bottom line, what you'll find there is essentially the reconciled estimate broken out into 2 components specific to just the library portion of the project and the site associated with the library. And that gets us to a grand total of about $23.25 million. Now, granted, our target was 16.5 million overall for the project per the original. And so we've been tasked with doing two things. Balancing between what gets us on that target of 16 as a loaded, escalated total for the project, being on goal, and then what balances those recommendations for value alongside the needs of the community, the needs of the library staff, and really in the development and support of your public space, right? This is your library, so it's really kind of a shared living room, a shared porch. This is your most public moment, potentially, for the city. And so I think that's...
Just a quick question. So who you just answered the question, you just asked the question that you were gonna answer. So who told you that that was your assignment? Where did you derive that assignment?
So we knew we had to find a way to get to the goal, right? That's what we've been tasked with by you, the council.
That's the one I'm clear about. The
Right.
council said that. The other stuff that you added, which I candidly agree with, who told you that? I mean, that I don't think I was at a meeting where we ever asked you to answer those questions, is what I'm saying. What I'm talking about is all this stuff about as a public, we build the library or build the space you want, meet the needs of everybody. Where did that assignment come from?
These are hard choices, and I think there were a lot of hard choices to get on the goal, right? And so what this is cataloging essentially a lot of the discussion around those decisions. If you were to drive directly into that call.
I don't mean to be rude, I apologize. But somebody had to ask you to do that. That's my question. George, you said you did?
I think I can answer that question.
Yeah.
Over the years that we've been spending with WRNS, with the community, with the Civic Center Advisory Group, with the staff from the Library JPA, with the Friends of the Library, with all of those various groups who have met over and over and over for just for the library, but it then became, it's all part of this whole project, those were the high level design criteria, if you will. The Library JPA and staff had tremendous input, more than me as part of the CCAC group. There was Phil Lively, there was, who were the other people on the library, Rose and all those people, that the library was a community library. It's a community facility, not only serving Hunterdon residents, but a community of over 16, maybe 20,000 other residents in the county, because it is a public library. And so from that lens and those directives, can you
I
fill me
believe
in?
WRS is still trying to maintain the vision that the town had and established at the very beginning for the Civic Center, which was Avenue PD as well as the library, and then just translating that with all these reductions.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because the way you teed that up, you're coming back. That's implying we're not getting anywhere near 16.5. We're getting some larger number, which is maybe fine, but I don't want it to be a hidden assumption as we go through this process.
Absolutely.
And that's my and that's what concerns me about the way that was framed.
So I have a point about that, the 16.5. I believe the 16.5 is kind of a unreasonable number, just because of the, number one, the amount of money that we do have to spend on the project. Number two, the increase in costs over that have established that 16.5 is really not a realistic number in today's market. And so to try to just have that in your vision here, I mean, if you look at the 23 point, to build the library literally as is, we're almost at that amount. I'm not saying that cuts don't need to be made, but I think philosophically we have to kind of maybe change our mindset a little bit.
I think that's actually, I'm in the same place, I think.
Okay.
I just think we've got, I get it, we got the question answered. You did a great job. I think Mike's answered just so we can,
Well,
sorry.
I know, but I mean, it sets the
Oh, we got the-
foundation for our perception about what we're doing.
And I'm telling you,
Because
you've
the
done-
tasks that we gave, the tasks that the council gave WRNS and the PMC and the CCAC is to cut to that 16
Oh,
million
I think that
which is
just-
totally
I-
unrealistic.
I think that Mike just wanted to understand that there was a foundation on how.
Good.
And to close that, one point of clarification as well. I think the recommended option, that's not WRNS's alone. that's a recommended consensus option that was provided from guidance from council liaisons, from town staff, from the PMC in general. And so it's not a reflection of one voice, it's actually quite informed. So hopefully that gets the, okay. So I think in terms of format, what I'd like to propose we do, because these are kind of in-depth options that are a little complicated to roll one column through and then repeat that whole process again. So I would propose that we actually go kind of horizontally across the chart. I can kind of tee off where we were with the bid design, what's been essentially removed or reduced in terms of arriving at that goal target, and then we'll talk towards the recommended or any alternates that might be up for discussion.
Good idea, John.
Okay. So starting just with the first row here, exterior materials and building structure. We did mention this at the last meeting as well, and I think we had a lot of detail around this discussion. The original design was the rammed earth stabilized wall with a double wipe. That's 2 layers of construction. It's a system that does a lot for us. It's our exterior cladding, it's our structure, it serves some acoustic and thermal benefit as well, and it's beautiful. Now, obviously that comes at a cost, right? And so we did look in the bare bones at steel framed building with more traditional stud frame construction and a more customary cement plaster. This isn't foreign to your campus here, your city center at all, and that the tradition of this building we're in right now is also one of stucco. Granted, stucco today is a very different construction than stucco of yesterday. So that's a distinction to just be aware of. As I continue down just within that column of the reduce, other materials or structural items here, the metal panel originally was a zinc metal panel system, again, keeping with kind of a less maintenance requirement behind that more natural material. It ages gracefully, requires a lot less in terms of patching, painting, and repair. What's proposed as an alternate, and this is actually the case between both options, is a painted aluminum metal copings and aluminum panels. Can maintain a lot of the look and feel, but it's not going to have that dynamic quality of the natural material. And then one item that we discussed at pretty great length amongst the PMC was the idea of the visual mock-up. This is, just to be clear, this is a mock-up that's built of full-scale elements of the building, typically exterior. It's not used necessarily for performance testing. That's something that can be done in place on the building through construction, but rather for visual testing. And a lot of times it has to do with the intersection of various material junctions, details within the project. It's a valuable tool for the design team, for the contractor, and for the public in terms of how the project's received and minor variations through construction can be managed. That cost overall came to about $60,000 for the exterior mock-up at the library. And so that, I think, is part of the reason you're seeing the delta between the two on bare bones over to recommended. So I think the key distinctions here being metal panel remains consistent, painted aluminum between the 2 columns. The recommended still maintains the rammed earth, and this was per feedback predominantly from the library, but as well from some of the PMC members regarding the look and feel, the structural integrity of the wall doing the work for us, and 3, the acoustics, really being a driver for the library staff. This is kind of an ideal opportunity for an exterior system that can be in support of a library program.
John, what does the rammed earth wall do for the interior of the library?
So in specific sections of the library, that rammed earth is actually present on the interior of the wall in those conference rooms, and they're towards the south end of the library. So from an acoustic perspective, the rammed earth being of a different material with a more porous texture, but also with a decent degree of rigidity and variability across the surface, provides a greater acoustic benefit than what we would find in a typical stud frame wall. Structurally as well, and the fact that it's supporting our roof.
There are no pillars.
Right.
No pillars inside.
We don't need columns.
Rick, please.
Just to give the council a flavor, this is on this item because this is one of the more expensive items and would have generated one of the more significant savings in the value engineering redesign. We looked really carefully at this, and at the end of the day, the library staff had 3 positions that I think were very influential of the PMC. I would guess that initially we were inclined not to go with this option because we sort of saw it as more cosmetic than actual structural benefit, and our minds were changed. And they were changed for 3 reasons that the library staff brought up. The first was because there's more structure in this rammed earth wall, there need to be less support structures within the library that take up some space within the library and cause some change in the spacing. There's I don't know what you call them, but poles, or that there's support structures within the library that are avoided. Secondly, there's thermal benefits to this wall that wouldn't be available with the concrete and metal standard type of wall. And third, and significantly, the acoustical benefits because of the library's proximity to the train tracks were considered significant. So the library staff wanted to go with this option, and the PMC, after we discussed it, decided that given the availability of funds, this was a good option, so we chose to recommend it.
Just for a point of clarity, just because rammed earth versus a 10-inch thick concrete item of the alternate.
Mhm.
It seems that a 10-inch thick wall is pretty thick. Would there be structurally beams in the center with the 10-inch thick?
The concrete could also remove the structural
So
need for the
realistically,
brace frames or
probably
posts.
between the two, it's really a focus on most likely some aesthetics, a 10-inch thick wall. I mean, there's been no
Right.
analysis of what the potential sound acoustics between a 10-inch thick wall and a rammed earth wall. Correct?
No, it's a very good point, actually. The concrete does a lot of what the rammed earth can do for us. I think one of the key differentiators between the concrete and the rammed earth, you nailed it right away, is the visual, somewhat on the acoustics, but then lastly, I think, is also the carbon issue behind concrete. Concrete's it's a very much more carbon intensive material than the rammed earth would be. And obviously, through the building industry, this is a trend that's gonna only continue to become more prevalent, is a reduction in our carbon targets. For
So
these
simple,
buildings.
just a simple question. If in fact we have problems sourcing the rammed earth issue, where the cost of rammed earth is 3 times the cost of X and we needed to revert, we could structurally not have to change anything realistically with the 10-inch thick wall as an option if needed because of problems
Yeah,
sourcing it.
I think it's fair to say that the calculations, there may need to be some modifications in the strength of that material, the way that reinforcement might work. But I think that's a fair assumption, is that you could hold that as an alternate.
I'm gonna ask, so what would be the design cost? I mean, for redesigning the project at this point?
From rammed earth to concrete, it would be mostly on the structural end, in the way that they would calculate the strength of material,
It would be minimal
would adjust our,
calculation,
Right.
not adjustment of walls, because equally they're the same. My concern is just to leave it on the table, and it is, as an alternate, just in case we have problems with the rammed earth wall that we had this last time. It
Mhm.
needs to be a vertical option. Doesn't change anything. I just pointed
Yeah,
that out.
that's column 4.
Yep.
So,
Thank you.
in the recommended list, it seems that you dropped off the mock-up. And so I guess the question is, that was a CAD mock-up, is that correct, electronic mock-up?
no, so this would have been a physically constructed mock-up. It would probably occupy some portion of your site right now, so we could actually see it in a true condition.
And it would be used.
For visual purposes. So that's a review, with these kind of.
Would it be used for evaluating or for making sure any interconnects are there?
Exactly. Yeah, this is a process. The process of making a monolithic wall is one that has a high degree of variability, and so it's one where we want to make sure that all of the means and methods behind that wall construction are being done accurately and correctly.
Okay, but you dropped it,
Right.
and so.
So it would be included in the recommended. That's
It's
why
dropped in the bare
Well, it
bones.
doesn't say in the recommended, it does not say exterior
No,
mock-up.
no, no,
That's
these
because
are only
it's part of the
deducts.
design.
So the red indicates where the deducts are built from. And so the fact that it's not listed under recommended means it's in per the bid drawings.
It was part of the original.
So we're highlighting through each of these what would be removed or modified to get to the deduct.
Okay, so,
Thank you.
back to Carrie's comment then. So we could have a design that would then show both rammed earth as well as the concrete. Because as you know, we did have one bid that the guy said he didn't understand the rammed earth, so.
In terms of the design and documentation, we can carry the concrete as an alternate. I know we want to be somewhat limited in how many alternates we carry forward, but if that's a big one, I think it does make some
Well, it's
sense.
costly, so.
Well, yeah, we need to. At the bottom.
John, move on.
Okay, on to the next, windows and glazing. So the original design, the bid documents had a teak framed, wood framed windows, doors, storefront. The glass was a Solar Band 72, which is one of the higher performing transparent clear glasses. When we looked at reducing costs, one option was to provide a storefront system in aluminum. This would be painted aluminum to match those same panels we talked about. Now the issue with storefront is it can't necessarily do the tall spans that a curtain wall could or that these wood frame windows could. And so with the storefront, that does include a backup steel assembly or an integral steel assembly to support that window system. So what that means is it's a little less taut and it's a little visually a little more bulky in terms of the way you would read that perimeter of the building. The reduction in glazing was one that we took across both columns, which was to reduce to a still high performing, slightly less transparent glazing, one that we use pretty regularly. So I think we can feel pretty comfortable about that. Slightly greener.
Slightly green.
In terms of tone.
Reduce the French doors.
Correct.
How many?
So we previously had 4 French doors on what would have been the front end of the library off to the deck. The reduction from bare bones was full reduction. All windows or all operable doors would be gone. Under the recommended option, 2 of the 4 are maintained so that we still have some operability from the library to the deck. And to describe then the way that window assembly would come together, a curtain wall system which can have a very similar construction being painted aluminum, but can be kind of all in terms of its extrusion. It's a little more higher performing, actually slightly easier to install as well, fewer parts and pieces. That was recommended at a slight premium, so you can see part of the reason that number is a little less of a deduct there. But that seemed like a good value in terms of constructability to the PMC.
Just to clarify, the differential between the bare bones and the recommended here, would you say, John, is the number of French doors?
I think it's
Because it's a pretty small amount.
between the doors and the difference between storefront and curtain wall. The storefront's cheaper, but you're buying backup. You're buying steel backup, whereas with the curtain wall,
So
you're
this-
all in on one
it's-
system.
The question would be, how important do you feel the French doors are?
Right,
And 2 or 4 or 1 or none?
right. 2 balanced pretty well with the design of the actual facade.
Okay. Continue.
Then on to building systems. So the mechanical system designed originally was a heat pump, which was located at the library building with infrastructural connections to the police and city hall building. To find some cost savings, what we've looked at, and you'll see this, I'm going to jump ahead to the recommended column, removes essentially the demand would be higher for that heat pump living here when it's supplying both buildings. If we looked at that as a single supply so that heat pump is only serving the library, we can take a 120-ton design of that heat pump down to a 30-ton. 30-ton at the library, 60 at the city hall. So significant reduction there, and that's what you're seeing in the $466,000 there.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow you.
Yeah, so
You're not mechanical?
No, I'm just trying to say interplay with the administration building is what I didn't.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So when it served both, it was sized at 120-ton. When it serves the library alone, we're able to take that down to 30-ton. And that's where we're finding it.
Presumably some cost is then being flipped over upon the administration building, is that correct?
Yes.
572,000.
And that number is being refined too. So we are in progress on City Hall, but that was the most current. I think that's coming down. Yeah.
But each facility should be managing its own costs. You can't hide costs in the library, that was for the administration building.
I don't think the intent was to hide costs, but more to find energy savings and look for modularity. These systems are designed that they can still be modular and tuned, but less infrastructure can be less cost and long-term savings was the thinking.
There was an opportunity to make some of these systems campus systems in order to leverage the entire campus together as one.
And where I'm getting to is,
And we own both facilities.
are we losing an efficiency there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, then why,
But we're also gaining, just to add to that, the connection of the infrastructure, the piping from having a central system over to that other system is a win. Taking that away does save money. So the fact that we're providing a new system at the City Hall, which is an added cost, is tempered somewhat by the fact that we don't provide the connective infrastructure.
if we're pulling back and saying, one of our goals is to reduce costs on the broader project.
Right.
Net, are we adding cost here or reducing cost here?
It's a good question. I think overall,
Total ad, maybe 30K.
So it's an add, okay.
30K, that's not
It
much.
changes the type of system that they're recommending in the admin
Yeah.
sizes.
Yeah, I mean, completely.
Rick, you
Because
have
if
a
you
comment?
go under.
Okay, so, if I can say something about this, this is probably the most complicated topic that we'll deal with today. This is the mechanical system, and the way that both the buildings were designed was to have one heat pump located at the library as a campus-wide heat pump. And there were some efficiencies that were gained from that. To the point that Wally raised earlier, there are some increased costs that come onto the library with that strategy. And reducing from the campus-wide heat pump to just a library building heat pump, as John has said, reduces the size of the pump and therefore the costs. And we're saving $466,000. My recommendation to the council is that we approve this with the understanding that this issue is going to be looked at when we do the Civic Center and police, the admin and police building. And there are two different systems that are being looked at for that building. One is its own heat pump, and another is a different kind of forced air heat. And there's some additional costs associated with that since we're adding a new HVAC system into that building, but we're avoiding the requirement to move the air or water, whatever it's being used, from the library location to the admin building. And we just have to look at that when it comes up, but I'd say let's go forward with this recommendation. We're not gonna go out for bid until December, after we've figured out what we're gonna do with the other building. And I think they're in process of figuring out exactly this question. It was raised this Wednesday at the PMC meeting. My sense of the discussion is exactly what you said, that it's a slight increased cost overall, but we don't really know that.
But we don't know the
This
ongoing
does make
maintenance
sense for
costs
the library.
either of this system over the other system.
Just
One question, Mr. Mayor.
Somewhat.
please.
So, changing, say, it's 466, and then when you've made the additions over on the, and maybe I'm misreading it, but it says that the cost of the mechanical system for the admin building is 418. So
This is
No.
look at this is the independent system.
okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Just a point, just one brief quick question. This is a singular system, and if we do a dual system, which having a unit in the administration police department component, as well as one, the life expectancy of the equipment is actually the same.
I like where you're going.
Okay, so therefore there could potentially be a cost savings by having a singular unit, because the economic life of a unit is about 20 years.
This is a great question, actually. I'm glad you asked. The heat pump that operates at 120 ton, actually that's a really high, that's a high design, a high load for a heat pump. So I think we would probably not get the warranty on 120 ton that we might on a decoupled system, the 30 and the 60, because that's a lower tonnage. So that is a benefit of the decoupling, of the dual system, as you referred to it. The other thing to think about, maintenance, yeah, you are decoupled, which can be seen, I think, in two lights. One location is sure, it's efficient, but the fact that the police heat pump is now at the library can lead to some confusion when you think about future servicing. The other additional concern, and this may turn out to be a minor one, but the singular heat pump is loud, right? And generally we've designed an acoustic screen to really mitigate that. When you decouple them, it does to some degree reduce that acoustic noise pollution effect. So that's another concern. And then lastly, the fact that the decouple, I think it's a small point, but a point we should discuss. We would need to find a home for that new heat pump or system at the police department. I think we have space where we can find that, but that is something that we would need to work through. But all in all, these changes from 1 to 2 heat pump, this is a much easier design change for the team to make. And this is a big, as you indicated, this is probably from a design perspective, the most complicated change we need to make in terms of the project. It touches almost all of our trades.
Think about that in terms of money. If we kept the campus system, there's no design change. To go into independent systems, this is a significant change.
What I'm hearing, actually, we know nothing about the cost of this, is kind of what I'm hearing. So what I'm hearing is, we can pick a number, 400 some odd, whatever, if we focus on only on the library, which is in some ways an artificial constraint. If we look at it campus-wide, we still don't know what the costs are. The additional costs are likely to be, we would call it, approximately 30, net about $30,000 difference, but we don't know, and there's also design costs which aren't in there at all, is that right?
No, I think
Well,
we
none
know
of this
what
is
the-
design cost. This-
Right, so, but you're saying this is, there'll be a material cost, that's a design cost, that's not in here at all.
Right.
So that $30,000 delta is really, we don't know now, it could be some hundreds of thousands of dollars, we just don't know what it is.
Whereas the maintenance of the central plant, the current design, would obviously eliminate some.
Is it-
And the
Right,
warranties are really
right.
significant issue, we gotta look at that.
Yeah.
That's the first time that ever came up.
Yeah,
That's
no,
an
it's-
extremely good question.
it's a good
And
point.
You guys, I think the PMC would like to have that conversation about
Yeah,
relative warranty.
that's information I just learned myself as well, but I think it's important in the decision making. So we should come back around to that. I agree.
Perfect. Move on.
Okay, so then I'm going to jump ahead to plumbing here. The original.
If you're doing that, then, I didn't understand, it looks like there'd be $100 or more $1,000 savings if you went more with the forced air, overhead air versus the radiant heat under the floor. Is that correct?
It's actually the opposite. So the switch to the conventional HVAC system, as you do find savings in the system shift to a forced air system from the heat pump, but we would have additional complexity in the fact that we're now switching our distribution from the underfloor air, which is doing a lot for us in the library, up to an overhead system. And the design changes, not to mention the structural changes and the way we support the new ducts, which are larger, the impacts are larger here.
Can I just ask on this topic, one little question for the library people? Allergies, kids, pretty common to hear about in today's day and time, efficiencies in systems versus the blowing air around. I know that Radiant's better system for kids. Are we having that problem? Have you seen it? Every one of my neighbors, apparently every kid has everything on planet, so I'm just trying to get a perspective. Can it benefit kids by having cleaner, more efficient systems? Are you guys seeing anything like that?
I don't think we're seeing those kinds of complaints. For us, part of the discussion was flexibility.
Okay.
I mean, we know the library will change over time. What's the most flexible for moving forward?
Beautiful.
But certainly, I mean, inherent in your question, you answered these are benefits.
I can speak to that. So with the library system, the distribution would be underfloor air. And because it's coming underfloor, it is air still, it's not radiant at the library, radiant over at the police. But because it's underfloor, it's closer to where we are, right? It's not being blown at a higher speed from above. So your point's actually exactly right. We can provide air low and slow so that it comes directly to us, and it's not, it's less discomforting, and it's actually healthier, right? We don't need to blow it at higher speeds where you have these variable zones within the library.
Perfect, thank you.
So if no more questions on mechanical, I'm going to jump to plumbing. The original design was for gender-neutral restrooms. Now, granted, we still did provide a demising wall between what would be one large gender-neutral restroom as two independent restrooms upon completion of the project. For value savings, we looked at, well, there's some money there. We paid for additional systems in the individual stalls being full wall partitions. That comes in the form of lighting, fire sprinklers, and mechanical, keeping air in each of those contained spaces. For savings, to remove that and go with more traditional toilet partitions, we were able to get about $35,000 in savings. If we wanted to, what we could provide as well is just the current design, which is what was recommended per the PMC group. That would still maintain the separated wall so that you have a men's and a women's restroom, but they would be designed to the point that where they were originally. Now, granted, we thought this might still come up for discussion because those systems are really driving the cost here. If the intent was to design per the original design, but have partitions which were not full height, right? So provide the partial partitions, but design the systems to be future linked up, meaning the branches would be provided, but we wouldn't go ahead and invest on the full height partitions. That would get us a savings of about $32,000. So if we wanted to go there, we could, but I think the recommendation ultimately from the PMC was let's keep with the original design on this topic.
I thought it was the opposite.
I thought the opposite also.
Yes.
Did I get that flipped?
Yeah, I thought that was another one where it was flipped.
Okay.
But still, I mean,
But-
31 to 32, I mean, 35, I mean, it just seems
But
like such.
just to be clear, if we go with the toilet partition in lieu still do gender neutral restrooms.
In the future, but what I would recommend is that we do design all the branches in terms of fire sprinkler supply, conduit runs, even potentially ducting for exhaust to still be in place.
But why do you say in the future?
In the future, if you were to make the move to a non-gendered toilet room, then you would at least have the infrastructure to support that.
That the recommendation was to go with gender neutral.
That's what I thought I did too. Yeah, Anne Marie's.
Which is the restroom as designed. So are you saying remove the central partition?
Gender
So,
neutral.
Oh.
that's the question.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, we lose
that's
the
my
cost of the.
question. Can you not do toilet partition in lieu of walls and have gender neutral?
No, you would want the full height partition with the infrastructural support if you were going gender neutral. So in the case of if we didn't capture this correctly, restrooms as designed, but if we were going gender neutral on day one, we would remove that central partition.
Yes.
That's what I'm doing.
Okay. So we save the cost of that partition.
So restrooms as designed, not gender neutral.
So just without too much detail, what would this do as designed? What's designed? Like what would a person see going in and
So
what would the bathroom
currently
be?
you would still have a men's and women's per the original design. The direction sounds like if we wanted to go gender neutral on day one, we would reconfigure. You would still provide the same number of entrances. It may even be an entrance and an exit in terms of the flow of that space.
But it would be one bathroom for everybody?
Right.
That's going out?
With full height partitions and a communal sink. Yeah.
Okay. And how much would it cost to have, whether we label them gender neutral or not, to have two bathrooms?
We're talking about the cost of that wall right now that would sit between the two of them, which is nominal.
For what it's worth, I actually think that a lot of children use the library and everything. I would feel better with, whether we call them gender neutral each or not, but two separate bathrooms, right? Just a wall.
Yeah, I agree with
I
that.
do.
I agree with that.
And that's the original design.
That's your original
That is,
design.
okay, that's good.
That's in the original
Yeah.
design.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the original design?
Right.
Or is gender neutral?
No.
Well,
No.
Men's, women's, men's.
So that's what you say under the bid drawings, it says gender neutral restrooms.
Yeah, to clarify, that is the ability to be gender neutral infrastructurally, but there is the partition wall currently between those two spaces. So we do
So
divide
there's
that.
no change.
As designed,
Stay.
the men's and women's restroom, and in the future, could be converted to gender neutral restroom.
Right.
That's what as designed.
The only,
So in my brain, it doesn't much matter whether, what sign is on the door, so much as the fact that there's two doors. That's my.
that's the issue, that's the issue.
That's
So right now, as Mike just explained, we have the wall, we have the two bathrooms.
Right.
Move on.
So as
So we're not
designed.
gonna save $30,000 in one place or another.
So under electrical, this was an item that I think made sense across the board here, which was just to look at the lighting fixtures and find reductions. And I think this was at about a 5% reduction to the overall. So that came out to about 19,000 that you'll see between the two. Site spare conduits. This deals with some flexibility. We like to design extra conduit into the site so that we have that flexibility for capacity or flexibility moving forward. And I see Elizabeth.
Question,
I just
Elizabeth.
wanna make a point, we're looking through the admin building, and this came up. One of our expert, resident developers said to say, and I think that number was like a savings of 35,000 or something, that it would cost more money for the architects to open up that whole bid document and go through and look at all of this and re-tag and redo every spec than the savings that you're gonna, I mean, this is not, I mean, it's $18,000, but it's gonna cost us,
More to change.
yes, because you've gotta open up the bid, and you gotta open the plans and go through every little line item and re-spec it. And there are
Thank you.
maybe hundreds, thousands
No, it's-
of little notations.
We got the message.
So, to that point, and I think it's well taken, and that point makes a lot of sense with respect to the police and admin building. If we are entertaining some ceiling system changes here too, and with that ceiling system change, we will most likely need to look at lighting anyway, again, and I think we'll find that savings even just going from one system to the next. So it's kind of in some ways, this is almost just a placeholder of the inevitable. If we are to make the ceiling system switch, we're gonna have to look at the lighting again,
I
but
almost don't think that it should be a line item.
I think
If in fact that was gonna be an off, like a benefit, like a found savings from redoing the ceiling.
I think you would.
then,
Yeah.
then that just is incorporated in doing the ceiling. I just think that it's not.
I think we actually is, because you're actually making decisions on each of these, and I'm checking as we go by, that they're included for the VE, for the library.
Well, I think the lighting should be included, because he says he does as he goes through the ceiling, he's gonna have to look at the lighting anyway, and so if he can get us some additional savings, I think it's a smart thing to do.
Smart.
But I'm not interested in having an $18,000 savings on paper and a $100,000 design bill.
I can understand that.
Smart thing to do, smart question. Yes?
Sorry. When you, I think item number 2 is authorizing WRNS to do the redesign, and when you do the estimate, which is gonna be your first step, right? Will you give us the estimate for the redesign costs for each of the different items?
Yeah, that's a little more challenging in that these things overlap, and there's some, obviously the ceiling system change has an impact on the lighting. All of these, it's tough to kind of pinpoint fee to one specific thing, so I have to, my sense is that it would probably be more of a overall design fee.
It's a range, you had said it was a range of 230 or.
I think, yeah, and that was all in, that was a range for 3B that was approved of 350 to 600, I think.
Microgrid.
Microgrid. Okay, so the library design originally had a microgrid in the base bid, and this was something that allowed the library to actually maintain its hours of operation in an off event through that working day, 8 hours up to as a maximum capacity. Now that comes with a cost, right? And this was something, again, we talk about shared systems between the library, the idea of a campus, coupled with the city hall and police. That microgrid was subservient to some degrees to the police as well, in that it could the power could be shunted from collection and storage from the rooftop of this library over to the police. So it was kind of a double benefit. Again, though, there's costs associated there. So that equipment and infrastructure came to a total cost of approximately $600,000. If we didn't want to invest in the microgrid equipment directly, we could just provide the infrastructure itself, no microgrid, and still save $570,000. And so that gives the flexibility for that idea of library support of the police in an event, and still kind of maintains the integrity of the original design. So I think that's the key decision there, is whether to provide the microgrid or whether to just provide the infrastructure for the microgrid.
I think the recommendation of deleting it at this point in time, but leaving the infrastructure as designed, I think is a smart thing to do, and we could. So if we leave it, we could add it later. Is that not correct?
As long as
That's
the
correct.
infrastructure's there.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that the recommendation list here, it's only $40,000 difference. I think that.
36.
Or 36, sorry, almost 40, sorry, around it. But I think that's a smart thing to do.
Mike, move on.
On to PVs. The original design was for a net zero library, which had fully integrated PV panels on its roof. In the effort of saving costs, deleting the PVs and the infrastructure, that includes conduit, meters, all the equipment associated with the panels themselves, as well as the stanchions that support them, yielded a net $850, approximately $1,000. To provide PVs as designed is what was recommended, although there was a great degree of discussion around this item, and so I do want to bring it back up because this is another one where I think we may want to flip the alternate or consider the alternate, which was to actually not include the PVs on day one, but to still provide all the electrical conduit infrastructure and even in fact design the stanchions that would support those PVs. And the key benefit around that was actually more with the roof design and maintaining a warranty so that the stanchions are structured in, integral, flashed, you have a warranted system right out of the bat. So when you're ready to.
What was actually recommended by the PMC.
Because we felt that going forward, we could take some of our surplus, even at the 50%, over the year and add to it.
So Mayor, what's on the screen and what's on your attachment 5, that's incorrect there. So
The alternate savings could be moved over.
right, 751,000 should be moved over.
PMC recommendation was to include the PV.
I think it's smart to, if we've got the funding like we talked about in item 1, we should put the PVs on it now.
Yeah.
Don't wait till we're doing a 50-50 thing.
Right.
Well, that's actually, the reason it was recommended the way it was with deleting the PV is the council's direction was to make the buildings Cal green. So that's where we started, right?
Mhm.
So that's If
But
you
it
want to
doesn't-
add a PV, we're fine
Well,
adding it.
yeah, I think the rules have changed a little bit when we found out that there's possibly some more funding. So we're doing some smart things like deleting the microgrid, but let's go ahead and add the PV at this point in time. I think it gets us further along. So maybe it's not 100% net zero, but it's pretty darn close.
Rick, add PV?
If we don't wanna pay for them, we should do a PPA and let somebody else pay for them.
I would take that as a
It
yes.
makes zero sense not to
Yes,
have PPA.
yes.
Wait a minute, he said something different. He
This
said
is
it's a
something
PPA, which is not putting the PPA
Yes.
on from day one, this is doing a
I
PPA.
said
on
we're
order.
putting them on.
Put 'em on,
Put it on.
In any
yeah.
case.
Let's go with putting it on.
Let's give you the full show.
This is hard, this is actually a hard call. So just so I get, no, it actually is, because, we're talking about $750,000 delta, right? Yeah.
Yeah, between the panel or not.
I think it makes sense to put them on. Well,
We all
It's
do.
already
We all do, move on.
Okay, so then that's corrected.
Okay, onto site. The decks, there were several decks designed. As you know, there was the north front deck, which was really the connective, most large communal point between where we are right now and the library front itself. There were also west decks, which were two in the original design. One was the maker deck, allowing that maker space to roll out into the redwood dell, as well as a staff deck, which provided a ramp and a connection from the south side of the building. Along the south edge, off of the adult reading room, was a smaller reading deck as well that kind of extended that activity and usable space into the dell on the south side. Elimination of all decks, these were comprised of Garapa wood, hardwood decks, was about $644,000. There was a lot of discussion around maintaining kind of the highest use of these decks, and those tended to be the decks that were coming off of the makerspace, as well as the deck off the front end of the building that connected to this building here. And really keeping the durability that was intended upon the Garapa, which was a key talking point. We looked at several options here, cedar and redwood, which per the direction of our landscape engineer and our landscape architect, I think it was a good comment. These are really more residential application decks, and for the type of use and the life expectancy that we would hope for these decks, really it's better to look at a harder wood like a Garapa per the original design. And so the recommendation ultimately from the PMC group and that information from our team was to keep the north deck, the largest community front porch, alongside with the maker deck, but to remove or defer the south and southwest deck, which was the staff deck and the south reading deck.
Marty, can you put number 6 up? Can you put number 6 up, Marty? So that you can just refer to where those decks are, please. Which one's Elizabeth?
That
Thank you.
there and the very back one.
Yeah.
So that everybody knows.
The recommendation was to maintain this deck in garage as well as the maker deck.
Keep the maker deck.
Perfect. Is the staff deck we redesigned to be in that grade condition on ramp.
Right.
We'd still have access back there, but we wouldn't do it as a wood deck. And then the south deck would either be deferred, we would still need to maintain exit access through that door. So we're gonna provide a ramp and a stairway off the back of that, but the deck itself would not be provided. And we would either provide that as an alternate for deferral later, or we would design around the removal of that deck.
Bill, question.
What was the cost of the Garapa versus the cedar?
Paul, do you remember the number off the top of your head? I recall that we did find savings, but it wasn't tremendous. I'm flipping
But
back.
there was a maintenance, but the maintenance is included in the operation of the library, so for me, if it's a big number, then.
It's
The
not a big
the
number.
library
I-
staff.
One, the library.
It wasn't
But I'd like to know the
Discussed
number.
that a lot.
It was also maintenance of hazard. I think we wouldn't want a deck that's splintering or warping over
It wasn't
additional
that
time.
big of a number.
But it may have been in the teens to a quarter of the overall material cost. There's still installation.
North deck was 46,000.
46,000.
That was a big thing.
From material only.
That's the north deck, the big one.
So, and I guess one of the bids, ideas from the two contractors that bid, they indicated there's a long lead time and there may not be that. So, I mean, we've got to consider that. Is
Yeah.
that true?
It is potentially true. We like the idea of Garapa because it's on the more affordable side for a hardwood, but everybody knows that, right? So it is in demand. There are alternatives, be it Black Locust or Ipe. Ipe, the drawback is that it's coming from a farther destination, but it's more people are buying it,
Just
so it's more available.
Question, can we add different variable hardwoods in there and not just say Garapa?
Or approved equal.
similar.
Approved equal,
Right.
that broadens the
Yeah.
scope.
Exactly. We
The
can put
thing
that in
is,
the
you know,
spec.
the thing, the concern that it's a long lead time, I mean, if we know that that's what we're gonna, use, then the decks are kinda like the last to get installed. I mean, don't you just order it up and isn't
That's
it?
just part of construction, man.
I
It's a
mean,
long lead
construction,
item, so you
don't
order it
think?
early.
I mean, come
pre-ordered
on,
it.
let's, you
They
know, it's, we're
pre-ordered
not,
that.
we
Okay.
haven't done this
Okay,
But we
the
put
first
approved
time.
equal.
Okay, I have a question.
add more variable woods of
Right.
similar type, and Mike, please.
Quick question, what was the utility of the south deck? I'm trying to remember. If we're
It was a
eliminating-
reading, it expanded that adult reading space out into the actual dell off the backside of the building. So it was essentially getting programmed without having to build wall
There's
to
a
do that.
cafe out there or something.
Well, the cafe was actually off of,
No,
that was on the north end. The south side was predominantly for reading.
Oh,
It was
the
a reading
south side,
terrace.
okay.
Can't you have like a little park, like the reading park, you know, they
You
go
could,
down?
you could still design site work, benches, or future donated space that could become a reading place. So
Perfect, Rick.
Wasn't there some potentially more significant design cost if we don't have the south deck?
I wouldn't say it's, if on the order to small, medium, and large, I'd say it's probably closer to the small end. In terms of the exiting, we do need to provide an exit off the back, so we'll need to provide a landing,
But wasn't
stair,
there
and
going to be, a water retention, something under the deck?
the stormwater is actually just south of it, that bioretention swell, and so that would probably remain unchanged.
No impact, Mike, please.
Where I was going is, I think decks add a lot to the building. This is where we're talking about $70,000 for the, you know, the system on top. I don't, what is the cost just to the south deck?
Let's see, if we broke out, I'm gonna venture to guess, because right now we're looking at a delta of about 500,000 to remove the north and the,
78,000.
$78,000 for the south
South
deck.
deck.
Yeah. Was that discussed at the?
Well, it was discussed quite a bit because, you know, and it was discussed to, eliminate the makerspace. And the compelling argument to keep the makerspace was that it really did, it was important for program. And, the one off of like the librarian's offices was a nice to have, and that was not something that was for program, it was a nice to have, and they could have access to this outside and have like a little patio or something. And then the back space, that was like to extend the adult reading area out there. And so, you know, the question, how much will it be used, you know, how important really is it? And at this point, but what we absolutely have to have is an exit. So you have to have a small landing and a little ramp and a staircase,
Right.
just like what we've got over here, so for exit.
and
I
the-
would too, so I think one of the great things about living in where we live is indoor, outdoor stuff, and
Exactly.
building a deck in is a really nice thing for the library. I agree it's nice to have, but it's a really nice thing.
Yeah,
for the
well, it's a
library.
$78,000, I mean,
Please, man.
if we've got the money, I would
Yeah, I
love to
think,
have it.
Mike, I think your comments are good. I had, and this is the one item that I would put back in.
Yeah.
If you approach the building from the south, it's gonna make the building more attractive to have the deck there than to have it just cut off. So I think it's worth.
I'm
we
good,
have the
I'm
money
good
to-
with it.
I think we're gonna do it later if we don't do it now.
Which gets us to Bill's point earlier about our arrangement with JPA.
Bill, what do you think about the decks?
Actually, when we did the original library in the park design, it would have a glassed area where you could be outside, do reading, and I think that this is kind of a similar idea. So I'd rather go ahead and spend it and do it now.
Okay,
Do we have glass around it?
decks back
No,
in.
that was
This is the one.
at Holbrook.
Decks
It was
back-
an indoor-outdoor thing.
decks-
All of them? No, just the south deck.
Just the
Just the south deck.
Just
Yeah,
the south
just
deck
the south
back in.
deck.
Move on, John, decks back in.
Uh,
Deck is back in.
Planting and irrigation. So the original design was a varied mix of native planting. Some hydroseed was considered as alternate savings and deducts, but ultimately the original base design was for predominantly native and decorative planting across the site. And with respect to the library and finding savings, if we were to move again to hydroseed and somewhat of an increased demand to support that hydroseed, the overall net balance savings is about $270,000. Maintenance of the original design obviously would yield the same costs of where we were. and kind of keep in context. There was a little bit, this was one of those items I think through the design process we have to look back. This was one that the community was charged about, you know, and we had feedback around this site should feel vibrant throughout various portions of the year. It shouldn't just go dormant. There was a lot of discussion around what that native palette is. So I do feel that we have a lot of community input and design group input in terms of what that palette was. And so I don't want to make light of that, there was a good discussion around that through this process.
Colleagues landscaping in?
I think that it's having a beautiful building and having just hydro seed around it, it does not give us the right impression. It's such a cheap thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to have the planting.
George, please. Thank you.
Just one comment on having planting or not having planting. You're gonna have a conversation on September 5th about the admin community development PD portion of it. Hydro seed was part of the base bid for that, planting was later. It may be helpful if we did a campus-wide planting at the same time versus doing the library and then coming back and doing admin PD. Just a thought.
Just keep that in mind when we talk about this.
Rick, please.
So I want to address an issue that Wally brought up in public comment, which was about the landscaping and what portion of the landscaping on this whole parcel the library is taking responsibility for. My understanding is it's essentially from where Ashfield is now all the way to Maple that the library is taking responsibility for, because this entire parcel from about where Ashfield is now, there'll be a walkway and there won't be a road there anymore. But this is going to be all part of the library with the deck out in front of here, and the library will take responsibility for the planting in front of this building and all the way to Maple, between Station Lane and the fence. And I think that's appropriate. And we will see, there'll be a difference in the whole parcel, because we're gonna have this side planted and the other side of what's now Ashfield won't be planted.
Great.
But that's just a cost issue.
Thank you.
And there may be some planting on the eastern side of Station Lane that the library will take responsibility for, but it's very small between Ashfield and Maple, but it's very small planting because we run into the courtyard and we're not changing the courtyard.
All good comments. George, planting in the library, we'll talk about the administration police department later date. Move on.
Fencing and furnishings. Original design was for Garapa fencing in harmony with the decks that we discussed earlier. There were chairs and tables as well provided on those decks for the placemaking we discussed. When it comes to the material, it's actually somewhat appropriate to consider cedar as a cost savings for the fencing. We're not going to have the live load of people on this space, so cedar as a fencing alternate does make some sense. And we ultimately looked at, and if maybe the plan on item 6, if that could come back up again. Thank you.
Talking about here is this fence right here, at the
Where's the,
back here.
you can
This
point
is the
that out,
house
John,
next
I
door.
appreciate it.
Yeah, the fencing was provided along the property line. So
This
there's
is
3 fence
a
locations.
fence here.
There was what was
And then
referenced as the shade garden as well. And this was an important discussion point with the PMC group. What's really important to maintain the security that's required for any outdoor programming. We know that this space right now, just immediately out here, is already used for ice cream socials and events for younger folks. And so what was really important was to maintain that separation, provide a cedar fence here as well as along the lot line.
Yep.
And then the recommendation was you could remove the cedar fence along the southern portion of that shade.
Yeah, because
Is
you're not
it
gonna
gonna
have
go
that
all the way
portion.
down, or?
No,
That-
there is fencing there.
Yeah, it would only be within the zone of what was the shade
Right,
garden.
he's talking about a secured area here.
There was a lot of discussion at the library and the PMC group with the library about the usability of that environment there. It kind of looked good on paper, maybe in concept, but in actuality, there was no way for any access, direct access to that environment other than for children to go all around to the front of the building here and then off to the side to access it. And the reality of
think an extension from the maker deck and creating a connectivity there would give you that future
But
flexibility.
that is something that is gonna evolve.
Right. So I think ultimately the recommendation, to contrast the two between the bare bones and the recommended, the key difference we're looking at was whether the utilities for that future shade garden are provided or not. This is below grade utility and by way of electrical and potentially plumbing for a hose bib out in that space. And so I think that's the key difference you're going to find between is whether we want to invest in the future idea of the shade garden in that location.
Comments just on that, please, if it's possible.
I don't think we need to provide utilities.
So, I'm sorry, provide utility, that would be in the.
Bare bones, well.
The recommended would include the utilities for the future shade garden, and that's about 10,000.
Rick, no real comment? Mike? Okay.
Okay.
Sorry,
No.
with or without utility provision?
Without.
So you want the bare bones option?
Yeah.
On to interior materials. This is predominantly speaking towards the material that's provided in the ceilings, as well as some of the acoustic paneling that was used as wall cover across the project in the library. The original design was for acoustic fabric ceilings, which is a pretty monolithic reading system. It looks a lot like a gyp board drywall would, but it performs a lot better. And we did have full height wall paneling, predominantly along the back end of that book wall, to reduce noise within the space itself. Two systems that we looked at were various plank systems within the library space. This is acoustic ceiling tile, planks varying from 1x4 to 1x6 across the bare bones and recommended. Casework was included as well, and we looked at a PLAM casework versus what would be a wood veneer casework over in the recommended. And ultimately, the wall panels, we looked to reduce the scope of wall panels in both cases, and I think that savings would be you would see the same number reflected across each column. Ultimately, the cost savings come out pretty darn close to one another between the two. I think we're paying a premium slightly for the 1x6 plank versus the 1x4 plank. And the reason for the 1x6 is actually just the nature of the library space itself. You can see it's not a typical orthogonal space, and so the 1x6 plank gives us a little bit more flexibility in the way we would work that grid within the library plan itself.
Colleagues, 1x4, 1x6.
Well, personally, I have heartburn about taking away the acoustic fabric ceiling, because I think that will substantially change the look and feel of the interior. And acoustical drop ceiling is pretty ugly. No matter if it's a 1x4, 1x6, 2x4, whatever. If there is funds, if we can afford it, I think we should keep the original design with the fabric ceiling.
We don't have a cost on the acoustic fabric.
$232,000.
For the fabric.
For the acoustic fabric. So it was actually cheaper than.
No,
That's
That was the detail.
yeah.
that's the savings.
Gotcha. All right, anybody have anything to say about what Elizabeth just said, please?
I'm more in favor of it. We've done a lot so far with maybe the rammed earth and we've added things back in, with the, keeping the underfloor heating, which cuts down the noise. We have the rammed earth, we have the thick walls. I think that we can go with the 1x6, which was
I think we
recommended.
need to look at the bottom line.
I'm interested in.
That's all right. Bill, Rick, excuse me.
I'm interested in whether staff has an opinion.
And these are high ceilings, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so everybody's gonna be looking up, just for the record. Staff, any recommendation, any?
This was a hard one. We talked about it in the, I agree with Elizabeth aesthetically. That would be our preference, and also just for the acoustics. But, we were challenged to try and find some reductions, so I don't think we have a strong preference either way. If there's funds available,
Right.
I think it should be
And I think we
included.
have
Maybe
to
it's
look at the bottom line.
Add alternate, yeah.
Thank you. Mike?
What's the process for doing, what's our process for doing this? I agree that makes good sense to me. just want to understand. what we're doing.
Can we change and put the acoustic fabric as an alternate, as a cost alternate?
It's essentially designed already. I mean, we've designed that.
already designed.
Now, the key difference there, like I was saying earlier, the lighting is very closely related with the acoustic fabric. And so the current lighting design is with that acoustic
With the
fabric seal.
acoustic fabric.
If we did make the switch to the plank, we would be reapproaching the lighting design to be consistent with that system. So, all that's to say, to answer your first question, we could carry the plank as an alternate. We could take the original design and put that as an alternate. But if we want to continue down the road of the plank system, we'll need to marry that with the idea of the lighting.
So that can go as an just curiosity.
And the lighting was $18,000.
So going with acoustic fabric is already designed and having the plank as an alternate 1x6. Does that sound reasonable?
There's a
That's
double-edged
awesome.
sword to doing that. If you have a multitude of alternates in the bid process,
Yeah.
it's just a nuisance to the contractors. They're gonna add a premium for pulling that number out. If you have too many of them, you're not gonna save anything.
All right, let's take care of this.
Well, let's find out what the design cost.
To redesign it to the 1x6, that's what you're saying? Or do we want to make a decision related to the acoustic fabric right now and move on? Okay, I'm in favor because of the fact that these are high ceilings and everybody's going to be looking up, that the acoustic fabric is probably a better option in the overall, and since it's already designed, I'm willing to make that decision.
That's a $232,000 issue. Yes, let's move forward. Let's actually, though, when we move forward, at the end of the day, let's, whenever we have our total, and if we want to revisit, this would be probably the first one I would revisit.
Okay.
So,
Please.
I'm inclined to add back in. I agree we should look at the total afterwards. I also agree with Paul that we should minimize
Yes.
the alternates. I think that's.
And that is something, thank you, Paul, for saying it, because we can get crazy. So let's just do it that way, George.
so we're adding it back in.
And I got it, I'm really good when people do this. Please.
I just want to say from a parent perspective, and we raised 2 kids here, anything that can reduce the cost, I mean, the sound is critical, especially in a library. And so, aesthetics are very important, of course, but acoustically, it's critical because those trains blast us out, as we
Yeah.
know. So,
Beautiful, thank you. Anybody else?
I had a comment about the courtyard thing, but
No.
we skipped
Yeah.
over. No, but it's, I can do it at the end.
Acoustics,
Acoustics.
So just for clarity,
please.
the 232 that you were citing, is there more than the 296,976? 232 was the ceiling acoustic. What's the difference?
The remainder would be the reduction in the acoustic wall panels.
So what about the wall panels?
To focus that discussion to, the areas we're thinking about would be along the book wall, again on the floor plan if I were to point that out.
Please, number 6, please.
So we did have acoustical panel
All along
that
this
book
wall. This
And
wall.
what we have learned through conversations with our acoustic engineer and with product manufacturers is that we can lean on the books to do some of that acoustic value for us as well in terms of the wall
And
performance.
that is also on the back side, not on the front side, correct?
It was only sort of within the zone along the outside, the library facing, not along the support space.
Gotcha.
Between the train and
That's,
So just to translate, we can't rely on books, that means we don't need it?
What we've done in terms of the limitation, we don't have books high on the book wall because it's too high for access, and so those are predominantly for display space. We would still recommend that you provide it there, and then where we have the built-in niches for seating along that wall, we recommend that it's there as well. But otherwise, we would, behind those book zones, we would look for a matching finish, be it paint or otherwise, at an affordable level that would create a continuity of the wall, right, but not have the performance of the panel.
What's the savings on the, just doing the wall?
Yeah, I'm okay to reduce the acoustic wall panels. At this point, I just wanna know, how much we would think.
That
much
came to
would we
about,
save on that?
that was about 30,000, or actually, is that correct?
The delta between those two numbers was
The-
64,976.
Right.
You have to do a
230 to
redesign?
296 or 60.
You have to redesign and take that out?
That's a, order of magnitude, small, medium, large, that's a small redesign item. Yeah. The ceiling was more of a medium.
30,000?
What's that?
Because if we're gonna save 30,000.
We're not gonna,
It's gonna cost
it's not a
$30,000
$30,000
to
design
Well,
effort. No,
that
definitely
costs a
not.
little high.
Absolutely not.
see how
No, that's an
you
easy
go
one.
off a reservation? Elizabeth,
Yes,
you are narrowing down on a number.
well, I'm trying.
George? Can we throw?
The 296, 976 number that's in that column.
Yep.
Paul Beamer said the acoustic ceiling was 232.
Right, 232.
So the difference is 64,976.
64,976, gotcha. Did everybody get that 64,976?
976, that's just, okay, so that's
So
what the
that's-
savings then.
Okay, did we get that? You got it, Director? We're good? Can you go on?
I will go on. Interior glazing and windows. Previously, per the exterior window system, we had an interior wood window framing system as well that had integrated perforated acoustic wood panels as well. What we've looked at more in harmony with whether we go with a exterior aluminum storefront or curtain wall, we have similar interior aluminum window systems which would be storefront for that interior. The key difference here being essentially whether we include the acoustic fabric within the design of that system or whether it's actually set within drywall partitions or full height glazed.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, I can point to Article
Because you
6.
don't see fabric in the description.
This is primarily the interior glazed system. It's in those zones where we have the meeting rooms.
Yes,
And so the previous design had wood frame windows,
Yeah.
and then the sill condition was perforated wood panel integrated within the frame. The design of the bare bones right now would be a window system set into a drywall, constructed wall, so pretty typical interior. And then the third column was a storefront assembly, lower cost than the wood frame window.
I
And
don't understand the
sill,
acoustic fabric panels.
that's our sill condition, the acoustic fabric panel in lieu of what we had
would you
previously, which
do
was the
instead?
perf. The original was the perf wood, and that was more in keeping with the wood finishes within that context.
Are we good with recommended?
Yes,
I-
I'm ready.
What's the difference between the 222 and the 175? The bare bones and the recommended?
Have some acoustic fabric.
Whether we run the acoustic fabric in the sort of sill portion of that zone, or whether we have a window set within a drywall. So it,
I think it's a good choice. I mean, how much acoustic, I mean, are we talking 4 feet as the, no, not
no, it's probably more around 3 feet,
three,
right?
yeah.
So 3
And
feet,
then you've got that.
right?
And
There's,
that's on the inside wall, so you're gonna have conference rooms, right? And so the acoustic deadening is gonna be from interior noise, not exterior noise, because you've got your exterior rammed earth wall, you've got your little conference room, and then you've got your interior wall.
I think we would recommend it on the interior regardless, to perform, for those conference room spaces to perform. We'd recommend the acoustic fabric, period. And that's pretty typical for most conference spaces. For the exterior, anything we can do to provide acoustic benefit, I agree with our audience member Christine, is a benefit to this space. So this is a relatively small dollar item, I think, that provides a lot of performance to the overall space.
Okay, so we should,
I recommend.
175?
We're good.
Go with that.
Yep.
Keep going.
George? Good. Move on.
Under furniture, the casework originally was a teak veneer system, again, to tie the full wood feel together. This was integrated with a racks shelving system, which is a fairly modular and customizable shelving system. That was all along the book wall within the library space. What we've looked at under the two columns here is essentially the same direction, which is to remove that shelving, that rack system from the project and put it within the FF&E bucket of monies, right? That's furniture and fixture
So,
spending.
because it's italicized, it's a cost.
Right.
But we're removing it from our contract bid, our contractor's bid.
Yeah.
And we're putting it over in FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, to be paid out of another bucket.
Is everybody good with
It's the
that?
same bucket, it's just gonna increase the amount of money, so we need to actually keep an eye on that, because it's.
And in the library, you guys have to have a resource.
Yeah, we actually have some relationships, and so we think it'll keep the costs
Down.
down, actually. To
Perfect.
do,
Great.
you know,
Great.
library shelving versus contractor bill.
Beautiful.
So,
Good.
go with the recommended.
Go. Good. Next.
Under area reduction, these were some of the more difficult discussions when we looked at how we get on target in terms of the goal. We had to remove some key spaces from the library, and this isn't a simple task from a design point of view either. and that we're adjusting the square footage and the overall design of the building. Teresa, sorry, we keep jumping back and forth to 6, but here we go again. So we're talking about the adult quiet reading room, which is the space off the back of the library, and then the 2 ancillary support spaces that are immediately adjacent, that small reading room, and then potentially an additional area of 150 to get to this target. And so a few question marks around that, and definitely some design work that would need to happen under that, the acceptance of the target here. So
Small, medium, large design guys?
this is between medium and large, if not large.
Did everybody get that? These are big issues.
What is the additional area
To get, we obviously wanted to meet the budget, right? And if, again, on 6, if we were to just loft the building, cost per square foot, we still weren't quite getting there. And so we would need to find ways to essentially work the design to get to that number. But also, functionally speaking, this was a nice, we're losing out on space here. We need this, right? We need our electrical room. We need portions of that staff break room and part of the staff sorting area. And so we would have to reconfigure that in. And so basically what that means is it tasks us to find approximately 150 square feet within those additional spaces that need to come back into the building.
So this is the target, essentially lop off 150 square feet.
Right, right. Redesign reductions potentially throughout all spaces or within the reconfiguration.
General feeling relating to lopping square footage.
Well, I thought that there was excess space, but given the fact that we have the funding, and the library really wants to have all that space, that's their recommendation, and they're working with us on the funding, I think that we should leave it as design.
Rick, I know you say this.
I move that we approve the revised library as we have discussed it and move on.
I mean, the recommended options
Yeah, as they've been adjusted today.
today.
Second.
I second that.
Hold on,
We're not really moving, we're just talking about this. We got 3 people that the square foot. Mike,
I'm good with
square footage. George, you got the direction. Let's move on.
Okay, I'm going to move to phasing. And this was another key item, was whether or not to renovate the town hall that we're currently meeting in. The seismic upgrade and finish renovation of this space came to a grand total of approximately $1.8 million. So this is a larger ticket item, but this is per the PMC discussion and discussion again with the library staff, this is a key piece of the overall design, right? It's really part of the story of how that library functions and operates. This is a space that would be used by the library flexibly, but also used by your heritage staff, as well as by your community. And so I think those considerations led us to put it into
So
recommendation.
let's discuss this quickly, if it's possible. Okay. Leaving or
We
keeping?
decided at the last meeting to include it.
Okay. Elizabeth?
We decided to include it
Bill?
Included in the recommended option?
in the recommended
Yeah,
option.
we want to keep the renovation of this building.
To maintain this building as part of the revision of this building as part of the project. We already decided.
Seismic upgrades and renovation.
Right.
As currently was designed.
As currently done. Mike, opinion on this?
Yes, assuming the funding works out the way we're talking about, then yes.
George, you got it? Move on.
Demolition of library, and this may well be an agenda item for later, but the demolition costs associated with the library at $140,000. This was
Mayor, do you want to speak about this one now, or?
Yeah, we have it as another item,
It's
but
a-
yes, let's do it.
It's actually item number
Let's do it
3.
quickly because there's a little crack in the vault.
So the demolition costs associated with the library at $140,000. The savings in taking that on as part of the bare bones reduced would help in that further reduction. I think, Marty, do you want to qualify
What's that, the cost? or-
the delta between why we would recommend versus not
Well,
recommend?
the cost is $140,000 estimated by MAC 5, but also reduced overall schedule about at least a month if we do it, by the end of this year. So the general contractor, when they're on board, they don't want to they'll have a clear site just to go start vertical on. So it gives them a running start to just start building instead of, they have to do the demo, we can have it done separately.
And what's the burden cost of the contractor for a month?
For
230,000.
Average?
so I get in a worst case scenario, the way this would play out, as I understand, is we would destroy the old library and then not be able to build something new.
Worst case scenario.
That's the worst case scenario, right? Just,
And the reason we wouldn't be able to build something.
this project gets off track for some, it's been 20 years, so.
But
And I do want to remind, we have the facilities already up there, temporary facilities, library can move in anytime.
Ready to operate today.
And we're spending about,
Operating.
and we're spending about,
Is that something more available? I guess my question is, are,
That's the question.
all right,
Rick, comment, please.
And library staff wants to move into the new building, and we have a lot of experience in this town with temporary buildings.
it's true.
And some of those temporary buildings, which are designed for 10 years, have been in for more than 30 years.
they say Atherton is
So-
temporary,
It's all, the money for this comes out of the same exact pocket.
Okay.
I recommend we go ahead and demolish it. Before the end of the year, save a month, we save $200,000 some odd dollars, it's a no-brainer.
Okay. Mike?
My thought on this is, realistically, the biggest risk would be numbers come back and they're much higher than we thought. And suddenly we're not building the library, and we're going through another RFP process where we're rebuilding this thing. It's delayed another, I don't know what, well, at your point, the library, we gotta get that built. So now we're kicking out a year, they're in a temporary building for a year. It's not great, I guess let's go ahead and actually, I see we have conflict.
Please, Laura.
Well, going back over the past year, a key is to separately put this out so that you can negotiate when the bids come in. I mean, that partially solves the problem you were talking about, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think, like a short answer, I guess I'm willing to accept that risk, but we should be open-eyed about it, but it's a real risk, I'm sorry.
You're already paying for the modular buildings now.
That's true.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to agree that the cost savings is pretty considerable, because I think there's also the decision that contractors will make that they're ready to rock and roll today. And that library component will be the first thing that they'll start on, because it's ready. So I think that we've got a direction on that. I think I heard enough whistles.
Richard.
Yeah. Which is also item number 3 on my list.
So for approval of the library, as we have adjusted the recommended column, do you need a motion?
Direct staff to get.
Or do you just need
It's a direction.
direction?
It is.
We have direction. right?
You don't need a motion.
Direct.
And Mayor, just so
We are
everyone's
directed.
clear, that staff will come back to council with a bid package for the demolition of the library for you to approve, to us to go out to bid for that.
Absolutely.
Yes. So that'll be at the September meeting.
September 5th meeting, correct?
Absolutely.
We
And
can't
since
make a decision in a study session.
since I am filled with words, since I've actually made this process a little simpler, if anybody had any comment related to the library component, come on, Sarah, please.
Well, just, just a question, is the Maple Station Lane intersection still, gonna be
Done.
modified, or,
Done.
yeah, is that a yes or no?
That was done. We did that, the redesign of that was right. So.
Okay, so it's still in plan, they're gonna
Yeah,
still do,
that's
okay,
right, right.
because it said the courtyard wasn't gonna be touched, but this
Right.
will touch the courtyard, okay, great, great.
Good. See how efficient we are?
So is it possible that, since we're having another meeting on Tuesday, that we could approve the moving forward with the demolition then?
No, that meeting's been called already as a special meeting just for the election.
Right.
Right, we
Process,
ready
process
now.
point, just so I can understand. Everything we've just said is predicated on getting an agreement with the county.
The final
They've got a
decision.
meeting on September 17th. Can we just talk process? At some point, are we gonna touch base after that meeting and look at these numbers and make sure that it all makes sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
And when would that be?
Well, we're coming back on the 19th, right? So 2 days after,
2 days after.
we have a meeting with the council.
And I'm sure we'll have somebody at that meeting.
And we'll have a discussion again with the Civic Center project.
Okay. Perfect. I apologize. I'm just,
The total number so far is 3.14 million. So that puts the project requirements at 22,138, and the numbers that we talked about earlier with the estimated potential future revenue is 22.7. So you're still within
so
the
we're
target.
then, gotcha. Okay, anything else from,
But it doesn't include the design costs, so there's nothing that
anything else at this point? Okay. Skip.
So Mayor, we've done number one and
We've done
number
number one,
three.
we've done number three as
And then
changed.
number two is give us direction about, number two is to get direction from the council to give us, for staff, to ask WRNS for proposal to do the redesign work for the library. And we'll bring that back on the 5th, so we need the council direction on that.
Did everybody, just because I know that you guys
Yeah,
have some other issues, is that, did everybody, excuse me, Elizabeth, are you following? Marty just said, Marty, please repeat.
So number two is to give staff council direction to ask WRNS for proposal to do the redesign for the library that you all directed us to for number one, to come back with that proposal for your consideration on September 5th.
Correct.
You need a motion? Or
No, it's just a
No,
direction.
just direction.
Direct. Are we good?
So, a comment on that
Comment.
is, if, I think that Mike's comment about waiting till the 17th before we make final changes is very appropriate, because if in fact, the board does not approve the changes and we're stuck with 18.2, then we're going to have to go back and look at this again. So don't start WRNS before we have that cemented down, is my recommendation.
Marty, problems with that? Please,
If that-
George.
if that's the pleasure of the council, the only issue is that WRNS will not get started on any design changes, and that clock continues to tick in
Well-
December, so it pushes that timeline.
It'll move it by 3 weeks, pretty much, so.
I think
So,
that's
now, I'd like to make a comment.
Please, please, please.
I truly believe that there are, that the design changes that we have implemented here, that we have decided to make, we're gonna make anyway, regardless of what the JPA does or does not do. So I think at least, a minimum, we get them started on these design changes, and if we have to make more cuts, after the 17th, because the JPA won't let us use our money the way, they have always used their money, then we have to then, we delete all the French doors.
So the timing here is
Delete-
critical, because we want to bring back the full redesign package to council in December, so we go out to bid in January. And that's the window we want to hit. We didn't do it last year, of course, we want to do it this year, so every week is critical here.
If anything, you'd be adding.
Talking
to
2
it,
weeks,
so-
you're talking 2 weeks.
Mike, your comment?
That's to Marty's last point, I think we need to accept some risk and be disciplined pointing at this January deadline, so I would go out now, even though Bill's right, there's a chance we'll listen.
I would have a tendency to agree. I think that, what level of assurance we've received from the county at this point is pretty favorable. I think that Rick's gonna be present, maybe even an alternate.
Oh,
Uh,
good, yeah.
I'm willing to move forward, to save the 3 weeks or 2 weeks. And if there's a problem, and at that point, then I guess we'll deal with it at that point.
But we had a discussion on the 19th, now, right?
Discussion the 19th, and I know we've moved a few things around, but I think you've gotten direction all related. The only thing we have pending really would be, we can actually say we've received the docs from the Civic Center component, but we really are not gonna be discussing that a whole lot at this particular
No,
point.
just a broad overview by Marty, but just one clarification on this particular issue you're talking about for design changes. We already designed deferral of the council chambers into the current bid spec. That was an ad alternate. That was one of the selections you had, 1.7 million.
Yeah.
I think we should.
Well, one sec, I just want to get to a
Please.
specific point. And the other is, the hydroseeded irrigation, that was also designed as an ad alternate. If you add those two into the options, then you are on target with our current available revenue selections. So moving forward with these design changes, you can easily add those two if you don't get the county library's commitment for those additional funds.
Oh, I see what
Okay.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
All right, so in all fairness to members of the public, any members of the public that actually would like to make comments on all the items with the exception of the funding component
Sleeth again. Again, I appreciate what you've done this morning. I think you've moved things along very well, and if we can go ahead with the library in the time frame that Marty talks about, I think it's great. So congratulations.
Thank you, Wally. Seeing no more comments, I'm gonna close public comments, and I just wanna see if we could just briefly touch for seconds, if it's possible. Item number 4, which is received and discuss and provide direction related to funding the overall project. I think that just as a highlight, if you please touch this, so I can.
We've talked about the library already, so I'll put that on the side. With respect to the Civic Center itself, you've got the high-level list that PMC is looking at. That was part of your attachments. I believe that's attachment number 7. Many of those numbers are still being vetted. Many of those issues are still being vetted. You mentioned the heat pump issue earlier. They're still looking at that number. They're crunching them as we speak, and that should come back to you on September 5th to go through the same exercise you went through tonight with respect to the library. With respect to additional funding or the available funding, we've got $4.5 million from Atherton now. Our unallocated general fund balance as of June 2018, Robert's not here for the kudos, but as he and I were going through those numbers, we thought it was going to be around $8.1 million. That was what our projection was about a year and a half or 2 years ago. It's actually about 11.7. And so that's a significant difference in terms of available revenue for the unallocated general fund. That doesn't touch reserves, it doesn't touch anything like that. We've also got the $4.4 million in CIP funds that's sitting there in our capital improvement fund that's allocated towards this project. And we've also got the building facility reserve fund of $505,000. You put all of those together, and you got $21.2 million. So we also have those out years. That's the general fund ERAF revenue and the projected revenue surplus of about $1 million. So those together is about $2.2 million per year. So you have 4 project years. 1, 2, 3, 4 project years. 18, 19, 20, 2021, and 21, 22. That's another $7.8 million of those years that's available for this particular project. Turning all of those on, now we're at $29 million in total for this particular project. That's still probably not enough, depending on what value engineering selections you have. You could get to that number by doing some specified cuts, and you'll get that on September 5th. And if you do reach that number, we've still got the cash flow issue that we need to deal with. So even though that revenue is coming in all those future project years, it comes in twice a year. So we need to be able to identify a cash flow mechanism, which we talked about a COP, to do that, to help us out over those periods of time. We talk about $3 to $5 million. And depending on the value of your cuts and the amount of revenue we've got in there, you want to try and match those two numbers. You'll see that on September 5th, and I'll send you a spreadsheet with that summary probably again today or next week.
With the numbers you just quoted.
With the numbers I just quoted, and some of the hardened numbers that we've already got to by the PMC committee for the value engineering. Some of those numbers are still in flux, but the hardened numbers will be in there. So the question before the council and the conversation is additional fundraising, just like it was the last time, COP, potential borrowing for that, use of reserves. Those are the conversations you're going to want to have. Also on September 5th, you're going to have Urban Futures coming back. We made a presentation to you before about COPs and private placement funding opportunities. So you'll have that update report to you as well. And that'll be a time you can have a more in-depth conversation about what those gaps are and how to close them.
Perfect, George, thank you very much. Any high-level questions for George at this point? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and ask any members of the public like to comment on this item. Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment and close the door related to council. I think we've got all of our items closed. Anybody have any suggestions at this point, like motion to adjourn?
Absolutely.
On the table.
Please, all in favor? Aye. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, try to move things forward.
Good work. Good work.
Yeah. I'll see you next week.